Hey, hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for the ASEV Eastern Section Hangtime Grapevines to Wines discussion. We've been doing this since January of this year, monthly, of just having an opportunity to get together with folks around the nation and have relevant discussions on what's going on this season and new topics. I wanted to say real quickly and just throw in a plug for ASEV. If I can pull up my screen here, um, let's see. Well, it's blocking my, can y'all see my screen yet?
I cannot.
Okay, give me a second. Hopefully it's not going to freeze up on me here. Okay, wonderful technology. It's not wanting to load my screen. Can you still see me, Mark?
I can see you. Cannot see your screen though.
Okay. Hopefully this comes around. But anyway, I want to put in a plug again. American Society of Enology and Viticulture, Eastern Section. There is a national organization as well as the Eastern Section. The Eastern Section is basically, for the most part, anything east of California. That includes New Mexico, all the way up to Canada, down to Florida, Texas to New York. And so this is a professional organization that is available for all to join. It's not just for academic, but we usually have an annual conference. So we had ours this year in Austin, Texas. And it's an opportunity for anybody, any land grant university doing research on grapevines and the enology side of things to come and to share the research that they're doing. With each other. I have graduate students come and present the work that they're doing. It's just a great networking community. So what I want to do as a member of the board is to have opportunities to have ASEV Eastern Section be relevant throughout the year. And so we started these webinars. I know everybody loves Zoom, but we really keep this informal. And that's kind of the theme today. And it is every month, is very informal. We have a presenter today, but it's going to be discussion. We want the audience to join in, ask questions. The way this will work is because of the way we have our link set up. If you would like to ask a question, you can type it in the Q&A chat box. Again, there is a chat box and there's the Q&A box. Try to stick to the Q&A box. But if you want to talk, it's with a small group, we can do an audible talk. If you'll hit the little icon at the bottom that raises your hand, it's under reactions. It'll put your name to the top of the list. I'll know that you want to ask something or say something. I'll click on you, unmute your microphone, and allow you to ask your question. So again, that is you can type it in Q&A, or raise your hand. Actually, it's not in reactions. The raise your hand emblem is right next to that. Again, my name is Nathan Eason. I serve with the University of Georgia Extension. I'm a county agent in Northeast Georgia. Served on the ASEV Eastern Section Board last term. Just got reelected for a second term. So glad to be able to serve everybody. Today, our discussion was wanting to be on fruit wines. Now, for all you purists of just grapes, you might be wanting to look the other way, but with a lot of our states on the East Coast or places where, we may not be able to grow Vitis vinifera grapes real well, or we're looking at hybrid options, or we have our own breeding programs and we're trying to create our own super grape that's suitable to our region. I wanted to be able to look at blending and look at alternative options for wines. Here in Georgia, all the way down to the ag producing southern part of the state, we have blueberries. We're one of the #1 producing blueberry states in the country. We have watermelon, we have peaches. And so there are some fruit options available for us, and there are wineries selling such wines. But I wanted to kind of bring in an industry rep or a specialist that has had experience with this. So I found Mr. Mark Germany, and I'm going to let him give his formal introduction here in a second. But Mr. Mark's going to kind of be talking with us today, and I want y'all to ask him questions and just really pick his brain while we're here discussing this, because I think it's a relevant topic as we try to diversify portfolios in our wineries. Yeah, so I'll just stop there. Mark, if you'll give us an introduction of yourself and a little bit of background.
Sure. My name is Mark Germany. I'm the assistant winemaker here at Fireside Winery, as well as Ackerman Winery. Our production facility is here in the big bustling city of Marengo, Iowa. We have our main production here, as well as our tasting room, as well as we have our 2 satellite tasting rooms in Amana, Iowa, in a National Historic Landmark city, where we have a satellite tasting room for Fireside Winery, as well as our tasting room for Ackerman Winery, which actually used to be the home to the production facility, but now we have moved all of that here in-house. My background, I started as a winemaker in 2015, decided to leave my career of many, many years and try something new. Immediately went back to school at Grayson College in Denison, Texas, and started, actually, even before I started school, about a month before, started working with RK Winery up in St. Joe, Texas, in the Texoma AVA, where I was very, very privileged to spend many years there working with predominantly estate-grown Vitis vinifera grapes. I then moved on to Marker Cellars Winery as the head winemaker there, and now here in Iowa as an assistant winemaker, which a lot of people ask why you would take a step down to an assistant winemaker, but it is a much larger job here. We're producing, this year, I think we're on track for about 18,000 cases and really looking at steady growth beyond that. So Fireside Winery is almost 100% grape wines. And then for Ackerman Winery is almost 100% fruit wines. Pretty much you name a fruit, we either make it or we have worked with it in the past and maybe don't anymore, maybe due to some issues or cost issues or some things like that. But the fruit side of this is pretty new, with the exception of in Texas, I also owned a cidery called Ralvin Ciders that was based out of Marker Cellars, where I was working with both whole apples, apple concentrate, as well as different fruits, fruit concentrates, and fruit purees. So I've pretty much had my hands on just about anything you can ferment these days.
Absolutely. I appreciate that, Mark, and for that introduction. I wanted to try to do something here. If you can pull up your chat box, not the Q&A, but the chat. And just for fun, I don't know anybody's history on here, but if you were to say you would ever be working within whatever industry you're in, an alternative fruit to making wine, I want you to type in, number one, the state that you're representing and the fruit that you'd be interested in, already work with, or of such. So I'll give you a moment. Go ahead and type that into the chat box there so we can kind of know who our audience is. I don't have the Jeopardy soundtrack, I'm sorry.
We got another Texas person on here. Hi, Fran. Another Texas, Peach, love it. Well, hi, Casey.
Montana.
There's those Aronia berries.
There you
Carrot
are.
wine.
Buffalo berries, okay.
I am seeing some intriguing stuff in here. I am quite intrigued by carrot.
No kidding. Phil, is elderflower the same thing as elderberries?
I'm not sure. It seems like they would be, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't know if elderflower is the precursor to the berry. Maybe Phil from Georgia could, shed some light on that for us. Yep, flower that becomes the berry. Got it. Awesome. So it looks like, with the exception of carrots, we're doing a lot of the same things that you folks are doing. I've never worked with buffalo berries before. I'm not 100% sure what those are. We have worked with aronia berries. It's not great success, I can say, and I'm not sure I know what a hascap is. Interesting.
Where was that? I'm looking.
That was going to be Montana. I'm loving seeing people from all over here. That's awesome.
So that gives us a little bit of background on our audience, and I appreciate that. So I guess, Mark, let's start with what kind of grapes that you've, not kind of grapes, some kind of fruit that you've worked with. I don't know. Let's first discuss the troubles, the struggles that you've had, whether that be related to cost, quality, supply, sourcing and supply, or just overall struggles in the winery. And I understand that's a loaded question because there's a lot of different fruits with a lot of different examples. But maybe just speaking in generalities, what are some of the risks and struggles that you face if you begin to work with this kind of a wine?
Sure. First and foremost, if you are a winemaker that almost exclusively deals in grapes, whether it be Vitis vinifera or Labrusca or other native grapes, the first thing you really have to understand is that all these different fruits have wildly different chemistries than what we're dealing with in the grape world typically. So when I first started messing with fruit, mainly apple in the first place, apples are pretty forgiving and easy to work with, can show a lot of terroir type issues like grapes do, which is awesome, which make apples a lot of fun to work with. With the cidery back in Texas, we were experimenting with different blending of different fruits and doing co-fermentations with those apples to create flavored ciders. And we did everything from whole fruits to concentrates. We experimented with puree. I do not recommend puree, but kind of had our hands on it quite a bit. When I came here to Iowa, and I think is a case in non-traditional, as I like to refer to it as, non-traditional winemaking regions, those are the areas that I have seen more and more fruit wines come to light, all throughout the Midwest, all throughout the South, where maybe Vitis vinifera is not as prevalent, even though there are varieties that are showing some promise down there. But that's where I've been seeing a lot more fruit wines come to play, as well as, there are people out there that are just hungry to maybe try new things, as well as, we constantly want to innovate for the next generation of wine drinkers. Our next generation of wine drinkers may not be as interested in a $100 bottle of Napa Cabernet, so trying to make something for everybody to enjoy. Some of the issues that we've run into specifically in the winery revolving around different fruits are really going to be more on the acid side of things, as well as anthocyanins. So from an acid standpoint, some fruits are higher in acid than others. For example, cranberries typically come in at about a 2.5 pH for us. And we have to make a really quick decision on whether we want to try to adjust that pH using sodium bicarbonate or potassium bicarbonate, which can be pretty violent to the phenolics and the esters of the juice itself, pre-fermentation and even post-fermentation. So we do our best to try to not acid adjust cranberry whenever it comes in. We run into the same issue quite a bit with plum. Tends to be very, very low pH, high acid. And a lot of times you're dealing with different acids in different concentrations. Apples are very high in malic acid, for example, which fortunately is pretty easy to work with in the winery. So with these higher acid, low pH fruit varieties, you can have labored or stressed fermentations, even possibly stuck fermentations. So you really, really have to monitor those. be on top of your yeast nutrient additions as well as your yeast selection. And I will just be completely open and honest about the yeast that we use for all of our fruit wines. We use the same yeast for everything, and that's V1116, which is pretty much a powerhouse and will chew through just about anything. And it can be a very aggressive fermenter if left unchecked from a fermentation temperature standpoint. But if you're able to, if you have glycol jacketed tanks, or are able to monitor the ambient temperature of your winery well enough, the 1116 still can give you a lot of very nuanced characteristics. We found that 61 degrees is pretty much where we can manage that fermentation temperature as well as maintain the phenolics and esters using that specific strain of yeast. There are other fruits that are extremely challenging to work with just by the type of fruit it is. And I guess I should preface, for Ackerman Winery, we try to use whole fruit for every fruit wine that we make. There are certain times where we have used whole fruit in the past and maybe it's so difficult to work with that we've switched to concentrate. But we try to use whole fruit as much as we possibly can. We do also do some alternative style wines. I noticed somebody was asking about vegetable wines in the comment. Our main vegetable wine here is rhubarb. We make rhubarb every year. And overall can also be a pretty challenging fermentation. But overall, we try to keep things as simple as we possibly can from one fruit to the other. Other challenges that we face, I mentioned anthocyanins earlier. There's different concentrations of different anthocyanins in each of these fruits, which what is going to make these fruits different colors. You know, blueberries are extremely high in blue anthocyanins and lower in red anthocyanins, whereas strawberries are extremely high in red anthocyanins and have virtually no blue anthocyanins. With that said, some of the chemistry that you are implementing within the winery as well can affect your overall color of wine. For example, with our fruit wines, we don't really use any sacrificial tannins to help bind to those because we also don't want a tannic fruit wine. We find our customers aren't really open to that tannic structure. And tannins can really get away from you if not used properly, with the exception of we have had color stability issues with specifically blueberries. So I know you Georgia folks, as well as some other folks around the world, may understand, but that is one we do have to add some sacrificial tannins. If you don't, you will have a substantial amount of color fallout in the bottle. And then on the very, very other side of that, red anthocyanins can be very adversely affected by sulfur dioxide additions and cause bleaching. So with things like red raspberries and strawberries, which are very high in red anthocyanins, you have to be very careful with your initial SO2 introduction, whether that be to whole fruit or juice, as well as your post-fermentation SO2 introduction. And we tend to go a little bit lower of a dosage in both of those as to not bleach out that vibrant red color that we're really looking for. Strawberry tends to be extremely difficult to maintain its vibrancy. It likes to kind of develop an orangish type character when introduced to SO2. So we have to be really, really careful in monitoring those things to preserve the natural color that we want from our wines. And then just to kind of wrap up on other challenging fruits that we've worked with, I've mentioned aronia berries in the past. I don't think we're going to continue to mess with those as we have not had a whole lot of luck. And I cannot specifically speak to whether that is a fruit quality issue or just a lack of enological experience with that specific variety of fruit. It's kind of hard to say, but it's really not worth the return on investment for aronia berries for us in the future. So if you do have specific questions about aronia berries, I'm probably not your guy to ask, but all of the other fruits that we work with, and I mean, I'm telling you, things like mango, very challenging in the press because it likes to slide right through those slats depending on what type of press that you're working with and can easily plug things up. So requires a lot of rice holes during the pressing process. And but other than that, I will say most of the fruits that we work with are pretty straightforward. And, here a little bit further in the chat, I can kind of detail some of the processes that we use specifically for making fruit wine in our winery.
Mark, just based on what the audience is, a lot of them are talking about berries. So
Sure.
obviously we got blackberries, we got elderberries, chokeberries, like that stuff, that aronia, cranberries. What am I missing? There's lots. So when we get these small berry type plants, the health food craze is getting big. And here in the South, the rumor, not the rumors, but people are all about the elderberry tinctures. And again, aronia, one of our specialists is doing research that it has it's kind of like a superfood almost. So if we want to try to incorporate that and sell that and market that, but yet possibly some of these berries have a tartness to them, that ripening potential. Again, I know of somebody here that's doing some elderberries and they're blending it with blackberries, and so they're having some good success. I don't know about shelf stability and long term, but just your thoughts on berry types of wines.
Sure. My favorite berries to work with are any of the brambly fruits, so anything that'll poke you when you're picking it. So blackberries, raspberries, black raspberries. Unfortunately, those fruits in whole fruit form have become quite expensive. That is something we have not switched over to concentrate for, and probably won't, because we can readily access the fruit still, even though it is expensive. So for example, black raspberries is nearing $17 a pound, which is more expensive than Cabernet Sauvignon grapes from Stag's Leap and Napa. So we have to be very creative on how we use those berries. But we'll say from ease of fermentation and ease of overall use, especially using it with the same exact equipment that we're using for making our grape wines, I will say brambly fruits are very, very easy to work with the exception of you really, really have to be mindful of how much pectic enzyme you're using. Red raspberry specifically, and I'm not sure I can exactly speak to why from a research standpoint, but we always have an issue not fermenting, but filtering our finished red raspberry wine. So we have to be very creative on our initial pectic enzyme additions, as well as with some of those, which we try not to use these if at all possible, but Scott Labs does make some specific enzyme products that are specifically rated to filtration. But yeah, I enjoy working with all of those brambly fruits because I like them. There are some fruit wines that we make from fruits that I don't like, but we still have to make them. So mango being a really prime example of that. But from a overall ease of use, you really can't go wrong with those briar type fruits. Blueberries are pretty easy to work with. We do work with elderberry, but I will say we don't work with whole fruit on that one. That is something that we do source a concentrate for, just because we don't have a lot of readily available sources for elderberry. But yeah, overall, a lot of fun to work with. I will say another one of my favorites to work with is watermelon. It's very difficult to work with sometimes, but the finished product, if done right, really, really makes a fantastic wine.
Again, I just want to remind our audience, you're welcome to raise your hand and voice a question to Mark as we go. We have kind of a tentative outline, but we want to answer questions. If there's anything that Mark's mentioned so far that you want to ask him, please go ahead and use this moment. You would just raise your hand with the little icon and I'll unmute you.
I noticed somebody on here mentioned peaches. That may have actually been Casey. So peaches are actually pretty darn easy to work with, except for using whole fruit. Any pitted fruit, such as peaches, cherries, apricots, so stone fruits, plums, that kind of stuff. You really, really have to make sure that you are either purchasing fruit that's already been pitted, or if you're buying whole fruit and pitting it yourself, you just want to make sure those types of things aren't going through any of your equipment. But once processed, all of those pitted fruits are also pretty easy to work with the exception of plum, and it's really, really high acidity depending on the variety of plum that you're working with.
Sounds good. I want to move on to, we'll address one of the questions we have right now. Chuck, I'll get to your question towards the end if that's all right, the vegetable wines. But Hava said, similar to grapes, which have specific cultivars for making wines, are there specific varieties of other fruits that are being suited for making better fruit wine? So, whether it be an apple or whether that's certain varieties of blackberries. I mean, when y'all get your fruit and y'all are sourcing that, I guess the majority of that out, are there specific requests on varietals of certain fruits?
Yeah, so kind of circling back to the brambly fruit, again, you really just can't go wrong with it. That's why you see so many blackberry wines out there right now. Also, blackberry wines are really good for people that are wanting to blend blackberry with either Vitis vinifera or native grape varieties. But they make a good blending wine for grape wines. But it's just a really, really easy fruit to work with. It's usually really readily available. I will encourage you, if you're not sourcing, I don't know what size wineries a lot of you folks have, but we produce a lot of wine, so we have to source a lot of fruit. So if we can buy it local, great. But a lot of times we're trying to source this fruit from. We have a supplier in Willamette, and a lot of that fruit is grown in that area. So all of our berries do come from that area. We have tried sourcing from out of the country in the past and have not had nearly the quality of fruit, and you get what you pay for. But yeah, if you're working with really good quality fruit, just like working with grapes, pretty much you're not going to have too much of a hard time. I also will say those brambly fruits are really, really heavily acceptable to do heavy amelioration, so adding water pre-fermentation. So what we will typically do, and I'll touch a little bit more on the process later, but we will add some water and macerate those grapes additionally to kind of extend and then chaptalize to bring the sugar levels back up to 20 bricks, where we really like to be on all of our fruit wines. But yeah, going back on specific cultivars, again, you just can't go wrong with the brambly fruits.
Great. We talked about blending, Mark. From what y'all sell in your winery, is it just the fruit wines by themselves, or are y'all blending a lot of it, or a combination thereof?
So for Ackerman Winery, we try to stay single variety fruit wines. There are a couple blends that we do. We do fruit on fruit blends. So we have a cran apple, we have a cranberry plum. We do a couple other things as well. On the Fireside side, we try to stay as close to 100% grape wine as we possibly can. However, we do have a couple seasonal wines that come out through the year. We have a wine called Sunset that we blend a little bit of peach into. It's a really wonderful wine, and we will also add, so blending your fruit wines into grape wines, legally 25% is the most you can put in there and still call it a grape wine. We actually try to stay closer to 10 to 15%. There are a couple reasons for that. Number one, we just grow a lot of grapes, and we have a lot of different wines that we have to use those grapes for. So we want to go through that juice as much as we possibly can. But the other thing is we want to maintain a lot of that overall grape profile. I have a colleague back in Texas, up in the Red River Valley, that makes if I remember correctly, it's a Cabernet Sauvignon blended with blackberry wine, and it is absolutely fantastic. And even though I make a bunch of sweet fruit wines, I'm not a fan particularly of drinking sweet wines for my own personal enjoyment, but I will tell you that's one of my favorite wines that they produce. That's not within their normal profile of just Vitis vinifera grapes. So yeah, we do Sunset, which is a peach infused, as well as we do use a little bit of natural peach flavoring to boost the character of that. And then we also do a sangria style wine called Lazy Nights, which is going to have some blackberry infused into it with Marquette, as well as we do use some natural orange flavoring in there to add the citrus character of that wine as well. And then we also do a wine called Sweetheart, where we infuse some raspberry as well as a little bit of natural chocolate flavoring that we use for that. So it's kind of our, Valentine's Day candy type wine. But for Fireside, that's really all we do from a fruit infusion standpoint. Now we have started our new brand, which is Firesiders, where we are producing hard apple ciders that we are blending with fruit wines. So instead of co-fermenting, we've already got these made or finished fruit wines in tank. Before we'll bottle it, that we'll actually blend those into the specific cider flavors that we want to make. So we'll basically make one big 1,200-gallon batch of just base hard cider, and then we'll start infusing those fruit wines as we want to get the flavor profiles that we're looking for our hard ciders.
But you think that market's out there? People,
I do. You got to think these freshly 21-year-old wine drinkers, or just drinkers in general that maybe don't like beer yet, or maybe like fruity cocktails, or the only thing they've ever had is a Truly or a White Claw. I think there's a really good market for getting them into wines by introducing them to something that they're familiar with. For example, these new wine drinkers have no freaking clue what Marquette is. And in fact, a lot of winemakers throughout the rest of the industry may not even know what Marquette is, but it's a really wonderful red wine. But you put a little blackberry in there, or maybe another flavor, you can really open up somebody's eyes. And maybe when that 21-year-old wine drinker is 22 or 23 or 24, maybe they're going to venture over into the semi-sweet single variety wine world, or dry single variety wine world, which is where all of us winemakers really want them to be. But at the same time, I'd rather make money however I can right now. So, it's all about constantly trying to offer a product to whatever customer you may not know you could potentially have. The other thing to kind of think about is just kind of, it can get out of hand really fast. So between both wineries, we have over 60 different wines that we produce right now. So the other thing you have to really think about as a producer or as a winemaker is how many different types of wines do you want or can you support in your portfolio. Fortunately, we can support that many SKUs. However, we are trying to kind of hone in on some things that we do really well and eliminate some SKUs. But every time we eliminate something, we come up with something new. So we've been teetering around the 60 SKU standpoint. But you got to remember, you've got to house all that wine. You've got to label all that wine. If you're wholesaling, you've got to be able to UPC all of that wine. That's a lot of money going into your graphic designers for labels. It's a lot of money going into purchasing UPCs. And that's a lot of money going into label approval and having different labels approved, or different labels available for all of your different SKUs. So it can get out of control really fast. So you just kind of want to make sure you stay on top of that side of it.
All great advice, Mark. Thanks for sharing.
No problem.
Again, anybody who wants to ask a question, just feel free to pipe in or contribute. Maybe you have experience of yourself of making certain types of wines and want to contribute to the conversation. Mark's our main panelist here, but you're welcome. We invite you to share with us some of your experiences if you would like to. Just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Go ahead.
I was going to go ahead and kind of touch base on a little bit of the certain unique or just processes that we like to use here in our winery. And I'm going to do my best not to divulge any specific trade secrets, but I mean, we're all enologists, and I think we can all benefit from the information that I'm happy to share with you. So we'll say first and foremost, all fruit wines that we make, and as well as our rhubarb wine, which is technically considered a vegetable wine. But all of our product, our raw product that we work with, if it's not a concentrate, if it's a whole fruit or a whole vegetable, which rhubarb always is, we cryomacerate everything. We have a large container behind our production facility that we are able to either refrigerate or freeze down to -19 degrees. And for those of you that may not be familiar with cryomaceration, it is simply the process of freezing that fruit in order to break open the cell walls so that you can extract all the proteins, all the color proteins, anthocyanins. You get better sugar extraction, you get better color extraction overall. And typically when pressing, you will get much better, higher yield juice extraction as well. Now, some of that fruit we purchase, so for example, strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, black raspberries, mango, that fruit, when we purchase it, all comes in pre-cut or mango pre-cut, the whole berries, no cutting involved in that, but pre-frozen as well for us. So we do that because, sometimes we get fruit in based on seasonality in the middle of grape harvest. And whenever you just harvested 30 tons of grapes, you just don't have time to get to the 10 tons of, fruit that you just brought in. So that's how that kind of started out. But we started recognizing, and through some lab testing through Iowa State, we have found better protein extraction through doing cryomaceration and all these things. It tends to make the fruit easier to work with. You can get away with using less pectic enzyme from the get-go because you've already broken open those cell walls. You will still need some to manage pectic haze post-fermentation. But overall, it just makes it easy to work with. Now, I'm aware that not all of you out there have facilities or the capability to freeze that fruit pre-fermentation, but I will say we have seen excellent results from doing something like that. The other thing that we'll do is when we're ready to thaw that fruit out to get ready to start processing it, we typically will ameliorate anywhere from 20 gallons up to 40 gallons of water per macro bin in order to A, help facilitate the thawing of that fruit, as well as to B, just kind of extend it out. And you got to think, when you're paying $17 a pound for black raspberries, we're going to try to do everything we can to get our cost in line where we need to be selling that bottle at $17 a bottle. So the good thing about that is things like black raspberry have so much color. They can take almost as much water as you throw at it. They don't lose hardly any flavor. They don't lose hardly any color. They will retain the absolute majority of that. So cryomaceration, and I see somebody that's said they have made a much darker red muscadine wine by freezing the grapes, which fractures every cell wall. So yes, I see that Chuck is definitely familiar with the cryomaceration process as well. And this is something that, we were doing in Texas whenever we may have had too much fruit coming in at one time, or maybe lower quality fruit that we wanted to get higher tannin extraction, higher color extraction from. So it works. There's a lot of research out there that says it works. So again, we have the ability to do it, so we do. Some of the other things to think about is we are using all of the same winery equipment, same press, same crusher. Sometimes we'll run the stuff through the destemmer, depending on, like rhubarb, we like to run through the destemmer just because it helps kind of break it down before it gets to the crusher. But we have to make sure that what we're putting in there, we're able to put in there. So again, going back to things like stone fruit, you got to have those seeds out of there before you really start messing with it. And we don't have an apple miller for cider, so just being transparent, we do use concentrate for cider, but we work with a company that we get a proprietary blend where we can have consistency and really have a great base cider to work with every time, just because we don't necessarily need to spend the money on an apple miller right now. So yeah, just overall, I think A lot of people are kind of afraid of amelioration. I will say in the grape side of winemaking, I don't do it. I don't like to add water to grapes. I don't care if my fruit comes in at 28, 30 bricks. I still probably won't ameliorate. But on the fruit side of the world, there is a lot of room for amelioration. So finally, we will chaptalize up to 20 degrees bricks in order to get about a 10% alcohol by volume wine. That's where our kind of sweet spot is. And we have found that that's kind of what's best for our customer, as well as best for our winemaking techniques, as well as our tax bracket. And then finally, I think a lot of us probably realize, and I just saw the question asked, what sugar do we use when we chaptalize? Plain white sucrose, just cane sugar. So that is going to be your best for facilitating a healthy fermentation. I will say we do use a different sugar for back sweetening those wines. We use fructose when back sweetening here, crystalline fructose, because we find that it is way more stable in the bottle. It actually complements the fruit characters of the wine better without making a wine cloying, because we have some fruit wines, for example, cranberry is 13% residual sugar. So that's equating to 130 grams of sugar per liter of wine. So we have to be able to use a sugar that's not going to give you that syrupy cloying type characteristic. And fructose has been a really, really good fit for that, as well as for our wholesale team. We don't have bottles sitting on the shelves of, we're in almost every Hy-Vee in the state of Iowa. That's 180 locations or so. So we don't think it's a really good look for us to have bottles popping on the shelf. And we found that fructose, in conjunction with sterile filtering and potassium sorbate in proper amounts, we have had way less of an issue, if in fact no issue, using fructose, and I better knock on some wood. No issue using fructose for back sweetening versus chaptalization. And I really, really cannot stress enough how much better fructose complements the fruit characters and flavors of all of the fruits, including grapes, that we work with, versus what sucrose can do, which is again give you that syrupy, cloying type characteristic if used in the wrong way.
Thank you, Mark. I want to ask a question.
Sure.
We had mentioned yesterday, planning for this, fermentation. You actually said that you don't do a lot of co-fermentation, but that you just blend at the end. Can you just expound on that a bit?
So in the past, when I first started making ciders, I was co-fermenting, and I've had some success with it and I've had some failures with it. But what can tend to happen when co-fermenting different fruits or co-fermenting wine grapes with different fruits is that a lot of times you end up losing the fruit character from the fruit that you really want, and the grape or the other larger amount of an item can really, really take over. So we've had much better luck with blending the two finished wines together than we have with actual co-fermentation. Now in the wine world, I love co-fermentation, but that's different varieties. I love doing field blends. I do love doing Syrah with a little bit of Viognier. I love that type of co-fermentation, but I have just found that whether it be from the grape crossed with co-fermentation from the fruit world has not worked out really well for us specifically. Some of you may have had some good experience with it. And also, especially on the cider standpoint, apple can really surprisingly take over a lot of these fruits, especially depending on what amount that you're doing it with. I do realize that, we have a facility and enough tank space most of the time to be able to facilitate making all of those different things separately and being able to hang on to it and blend it what we want. So I do realize that not everybody in this conversation has that luxury. So I would definitely like to hear your thoughts on co-fermentation, because I'm sure some of you guys are having to do that just based on logistics and space.
Yeah, thanks.
I speak from experience that too. So Marker Cellar is the winery that I came from before this, our production facility, and Casey may be able to correct me on here because she's actually on the chat, but about 1,000 square feet, and that also held our bottled wine as well. So if you ever want to really talk about the challenges of working in a tight space, I can definitely definitely speak to that for you.
I think every vineyard winery starts out that way. Chuck also mentions about blending works best when we do bench trials for the best blend ratios.
Yeah, so we'll bench trial everything out here. I will say our target is typically, again, 15%, but we will go up to 25% on when blending. And a lot of that really is equating to ciders. I still want to be able to call it an apple cider as much as I possibly can. In the fruit side of the world with things, we like to stay under 15%, or the grape side of things, we like to stay under 15%. Or at 15%, but preferably under for those types of blending applications. But again, we'll get in there, we'll do bench trials, and we may find out that may not be the case because all fruit is different year to year.
Mark, are all fruit wines sweet?
Well, so I can't stress enough again how much I am a dry wine fan for my personal enjoyment. I have had to work really, really hard over the last year to develop a palate for sweet wines. And I'm pretty proud of the progress that I've made there. I will tell you, I have had some dry fruit wines out there. I like making a dry hard cider. And I think I've had the most success with dry fruit-oriented fermented products in that realm. But if you've ever had dry cranberry, it's not an enjoyable experience. Any of your high acid wines, it's not. And the reason why people started sweetening these fruit wines was to balance out the high acidity of these specific wines. So we vary at Ackerman as low as 3% residual sugar, and we go up to, we have gone as high as 14% residual sugar. And that's a lot of sugar. If you've ever dumped 1,000 pounds of sugar into a wine before, it's quite the experience. But here's what I will say is we have started noticing a trend. So our Ackerman customer, Ackerman Winery is the longest continuously running or continuously operating winery in the state of Iowa. So we have a lot of very mature customers, and a lot of those customers have really, really enjoyed sweet wines for a long time. But we are now in a time where people are starting to become more diet conscious, sugar conscious, whether that be because of diabetes or just wanting to watch your health overall. So as well as we've started discovering as we get young customers coming out to the Amanas to visit Ackerman Winery, that they're starting to say, oh, this is too sweet. So we've actually started in some wines, not all of them, but where we can get it and still get the exact flavor profile we want. So here's a good example. So our rhubarb wine has always been 13% residual sugar. People think rhubarb, they think rhubarb pie, so they want a sweet wine. And our winemaker and I started talking. I was like, what is the point of diminishing return when back sweetening these wines? And so we started doing bench trials, and we did a 13%, a 12, 11, a 10, 9, 8, and we tasted all of them. And we started going, okay, like 10 and 11 are pretty close to what we're already getting from 13. So why are we adding more sugar to get to 13? And we ended up settling on 11% residual sugar. We may back that down again next year. And sometimes it depends on the quality of the fruit and the overall acid of the wine. But I will say that if you're in the business of selling or you want to get in the business of selling dry fruit wines, I support you, but I will tell you, you're going to have a rough road ahead of you. So don't be afraid of sugar, but I will say, don't be afraid to really spend some time to figure out what's not only best for you, but best for your customer. There are times when we do tours here. I mean, we had a tour of 40 people where I was like, well, let's mix this up and see what you think. And we did a little blending demonstration. And found that the customers wanted something slightly less sweet. So it's really eye-opening whenever you let your customer base taste things. Again, the previous winery I worked for was really big on inviting customers into the cellar to do barrel sampling or to taste out of the tank. And it'll blow your mind how important and how much information your customers will give you. And always listen and ask your employees, because they're the front line working in the tasting room, that are going to give you the feedback on what the customers truly think. So we try to do everything based on education here from those customers as well as our employees, but do what's best for your current space and what's best for your business. It's all about keeping the lights on and keeping your employees paid, guys.
Amen to that.
Yep.
I don't want to dive too much into the details because we are getting close to the end of our time here, but you had mentioned on some examples where y'all do some artificial flavoring enhancement.
Sure.
Sounds like a slippery slope.
It is.
What's your thoughts on that?
So number one, we never use artificial flavoring. So we will use flavorings that are considered natural by the FDA. So we try to stick to those types of things. But I will tell you, we try to use them as absolutely little as infrequently as possible and as small amounts as we possibly can. So when you're thinking about using a flavoring for a wine, we're typically walking around the realm of like 1, maybe 2 milliliters of flavoring per liter of wine. So it's a very, very small amount. So a really good example of this here is, we don't get peaches here in Iowa, not really a thing here. I do miss Fredericksburg for the wonderful peaches down there, and I do love a good Georgia peach. So we tend to make our peach wine here from concentrate. And if you've ever worked with peach concentrate, and I don't really know why this is, but I never really get that peach aroma that I'm really truly looking for, and like I used to get from Texas grown peaches. So I do miss that a lot. So we will use a little bit of natural peach flavoring. Think LaCroix, we will use just a little bit of that just to enhance. Really, we're not trying to enhance the flavor profile. We're trying to enhance the nose of that. When you pour somebody a glass of peach wine and they go to smell that, you want them to smell peaches. So I do understand that it's a slippery slope, but our goal and really our mission statement almost is that we're not going to put something in the bottle that we aren't 100% sure the customer is going to like. And we want the customer to be able to recognize what it is. So peach is one of the few. We have had years where we've had to add just a little bit to blackberry just to get the nose that we're looking for. But it's a pretty rare occurrence unless we're making one of those specialty wines that I mentioned earlier.
Thank you.
So we got a question from Chuck. The key is producing a well-balanced wine, whether it is dry, off-dry, semi-sweet, or sweet. I 100% agree, Chuck. Having said that, most of the gold medal winners in the competitions are semi-sweet because it is easier to balance. I would also agree with that. I will say that our higher medaling wines, with the exception of rhubarb, because it medals quite a bit, but our higher medaling wines are on the lower scale of the sweetness scale. So, and again, most everything that we do some as low as 3% at Ackerman, but everything we're doing pretty much is between 6 and 13% residual sugar.
Is there any other questions here towards the end? We will end on our main discussion on the vegetables, but we have about 2 minutes. Is there any other questions? Again, you are welcome to audibly ask by raising your hand. I'll unmute you, or you can type it in. As you can tell, Mark's a plethora of knowledge here, so pick his brain.
There was one thing I was going to mention, and I'm only going to bring this up because we ran into this problem last year, and that is specifically in brambly fruits. Kind of going back to that world again because I like working with them so much. But so just to be clear, we cross flow filter and then we membrane filter as we're bottling all of our wines. So all of our wines are sterile filtered down to 0.45 microns. But in our red raspberry, black raspberry, and blackberry, we were still getting some really interesting looking white sediment, and not crystals, not like tartrates. It wasn't yeast. So finally, we sent it off to Iowa State, and they figured out that it was egalic acid precipitation, which is something I had never heard of, not something I was taught in enology school. And we found through some research that a very small addition of 0.2 grams of citric acid per liter pre-bottling actually works to keep that egalic acid in solution. So we are no longer having that fallout or that precipitation or sediment in our bottles with that. So just a little, tip of the trade for you guys that are working with those brambly fruits. Maybe you guys have run into that kind of stuff before. I see Chuck probably has, because he's raising his hand.
All right, Chuck, you, let's see here. I think I gave you the ability to unmute yourself. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was curious about listening to your conversation. You've clearly done a lot of stuff with fruit wines. I've got a little more experience on some vegetable type wines, but in the process of going through and looking at the various additions and possibilities, most winemakers have some like over 200 additives technically that we can add to the wines, no matter what it is. But I've been a friend and a fan of Jack Keller down in Texas for years. Sorry, he died a couple of years ago, but I've made some very unusual wines. And along the way, you learn stuff. And I wanted to know if in the berry family or any other fruits that you work with, have you ever run across a problem where the chemistry and the fermentation process, like it does in carrots, during the fermentation process, the organic molecules that are responsible for the nose and for the flavor of the carrot is destroyed. So the resulting carrot wine does not taste like carrots. And I got a silver medal last year in my carrot wine because the judges didn't know that. They said, well, it's carrot wine supposed to taste like carrots. It doesn't. And so after the fact, with a little education, they had learned that they'd probably made a mistake. I should have gotten a gold medal, but hey, that's what it is. So I just wonder if you had that experience with any other types of berries or fruits that you work with.
I am very fortunate to say that I have not. Probably the closest thing that I've run into that with is we do make dandelion wine as well.
Commercially?
Yes, we do make commercially produced dandelion wine. We make about 500 gallons a year. We have customers bring in dandelion from all over the state. Dandelion blossoms only. We steep it like a tea in hot water, but essentially you're making a seltzer. So you are really at that point just fermenting a flavored sugar water. And it's a very challenging fermentation. It requires a lot of yeast nutrient in order to get it through fermentation. But dandelion as a blossom smells like one thing. When you get it wet, it smells like another thing. I think it smells like kind of like grain in a brewery. My colleague and winemaker, Zach, believes it smells like cow manure. I didn't pick that up. But it ends up making a very delightful kind of vegetative, pyrazine forward type of wine. So it is a complete difference from what you start with to what you finish with. Our customers absolutely love it. It's one of our top selling wines. But it's interesting. But in the fruit realm of things, we have been very, very fortunate to run into instances where we're not losing those esters and phenolic compounds that are so great for those particular fruits. I'll say one that holds on to it the best is strawberry. There's just no mistaking when strawberry is fermenting in the winery, and when it's done, I mean, it's just the most wonderful smelling thing in the world. I love strawberries though.
Well, I found strawberries to be a very difficult wine to make. So good for you. On the dandelion, what is the taste profile on the dandelion? I mean, I've tasted dandelion wines from 0 to 100. I mean, from absolutely crappy to absolutely fabulous.
Sure.
Are you getting any of the aroma at all of the original flower?
You do still get some of the original aroma, but it is pretty pyrazine heavy.
Sure.
I mean, at the end of the day, you're fermenting a weed. So it can typically be kind of high in those green bell pepper characters, but it is really, really well nuanced with just enough floral character to go, oh, that's dandelion, you know?
So you have chaptalized, of course, to get it up above 10.5%, right?
Well, so
So
typically whenever you're done steeping your dandelion juice, I think we are at 1.5 bricks of sugar. So we had to chaptalize from 1.5 bricks to 20 bricks.
1.5. I've only been able to get up to about 1. Okay,
Yeah.
so all right. So, but you're not using high fructose corn syrup for that.
No. So
Okay.
we use sucrose for chaptalization, and we back sweeten with crystalline fructose, not high fructose corn syrup.
Okay, super. Yeah, we have in North Carolina, we have a lot of wineries here who are doing muscadine wines, and they're doing a sweetening with that high fructose corn syrup, and it just makes it nasty, cloying. I mean, it's just awful.
Yeah, I'm
Unfortunately,
not a fan
the
of that.
the good ones are using just cane sugar. Yep.
And I say, however you're maintaining profitability and putting a good product out to your customers. So speaking as a whole for anybody that may watch this video later, whatever you got to do to make your business operate properly, whatever makes you happy. I personally am not a fan of high fructose corn syrup, but have found that fructose, crystalline fructose, is a fantastic use in the winery.
The chemistry makes sense. From my view, at least, I think the chemistry of that makes sense. So
Yeah.
I agree. I'll have to give that a shot.
Sure. It
All
is
right,
more
Mr. Chuck.
expensive than sucrose, I will warn you.
Thank you, Chuck, for your question. So again, we're going to wrap up. We've been an hour here. I just want to thank all of our participants. We held on a good group here throughout the whole hour. And hopefully it wasn't painful. I always just enjoy the conversational style format. So this will be uploaded onto our YouTube page. That's the ASEV-ES Eastern Section YouTube. So you can search that profile. I'll try to get it uploaded as soon as possible. If you'd like to share this with anybody else who you feel would like to watch it. We will be doing next month's on August 16th. And that topic will be, let's see here. Top most common mistakes when making wine: to hang or not to hang. Are we really compromising phenols for just bricks? So that kind of came from here in Georgia. You get to harvest time, and we have hurricanes sometimes swing through, and the almighty question is harvest it or not to harvest it? We get botrytis sometimes setting in, sour rot setting in, and sometimes we just compromise too much juice, too much of a lot of things for that extra little bit of sweetness. So we're going to try to have some enologists on board from that discussion. So we'd encourage you to tune back in on August 16th, same time, same place. We'll send out the reminder on that. But Mark, thank you so much. You've been this has been fantastic, and appreciate your willingness to share your knowledge and information to better and further the industry.
Anytime, Nathan.
All right, sir. Well, we're going to stop recording.